All right, now we're good to go. And welcome everyone to the State Route 37 Policy Committee of Thursday, September 1st, 2022. And thank you for your patience as we got everyone in the correct rooms going forward. So I want to call the meeting to order, and I believe that we all know one another at this particular point in time. So we'll skip the introduction. I think we'll go directly to open it up for public comment, and I'll ask Drew to help us maneuver through the public comment segment.
Yeah. Alrighty. I did not receive any pre-submitted public comments prior to this meeting, and I currently see one hand raised. There's now two. Alrighty, and we will start with Steve Bertelbaugh. Steve, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you, Steve Bertelbaugh with the Transportation Land Use Coalition. I want to emphasize that I think the most important thing to focus on at this point is getting the transit operation going. And I'm disappointed that the tolling bill has not moved forward, because I think that will support a lot of the transit. I'm suggesting that a queue jump at the west end of the two-lane segment would be it could get the early shift to transit going. And I think we need to focus more on the use of the smart right-of-way, perhaps by Soul Trans, to provide rail service. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Next I have in line is a Thomas. Thomas, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Good morning. My name is Tom. Can you hear me?
Yes, sorry about that.
Great. My name is Thomas Els, and I'm in doing some descriptions of myself. I find that I'm a fifth-generation engineer, although that does involve some foreign immigrant engineers trained in foreign countries. So they're different. They're trained a little different in foreign countries. But fifth generation engineer and civil environmental engineer. And so I just wanted to say, when new science arrives, we must modify our thinking. Now, I do want to support the multimodal approach of Congressman Huffman and the Coastal Conservancy, the Baylands Group, State Route 37, July 2022 paper, and especially item 3, which mentioned to accelerate the cutting of green tape. So that's important in my comments. All of their elements can be incorporated in my comments. What I'm trying to say is that, well, in following also Steve Bertelbaugh, that transit is important as a adjunct to what's going to happen even in your interim plan. So in your interim plan, like on Highway 101, it was just horrible. I commuted to San Francisco for 12 years, from 2000 until the SMART train, and it was just horrible. I did not commute after 2012, well, thankfully, in a way. But the point is, we needed to have the alternative, transit alternative before that. And so that would be important. Looking at the system, you could have transit on the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge, as you say in your letter to Congressman Huffman, is that 37 is an alternate route to the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge. Richmond-San Rafael is also an alternate to 37. So you could have transit on there. We could have transit on the surface where the rail is and should have, but we should also consider in the interim protection. And the reason I say science modification is that we now understand from the Corps of Engineers and USGS is that there's only going to be 12 inches of sea level rise. Now, I recommend having sound walls along the side. This does not prevent water from going and migrating underneath, across to refresh the bay, the tidelands, excuse me. But you could have those sound walls and they would prevent flooding on the surface of the road. And you have to make them like a boat. And so it's difficult, but it's possible, and it's far less expensive than raising anything, particularly because there's only 12 inches of rise to 22 through 2050. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. Next I have in line is a Gita Dev. Gita, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking these public comments for the policy meeting. My name is Gita Dev. I am with the Sierra Club's California level 3-chapter committee called Bay Alive. And it's really a group formed to emphasize the fact that the Bay is a living organism. And as the sea levels rise, which is what we're dealing with here, it's really important that we keep the Bay alive and include nature-based adaptation into even our interim measures. I'd like to support what the first speaker mentioned, which was an interim approach that would allow the queue jumping for transit or carpools. As we noticed, there is a very high percentage of carpooling on this particular segment, and that needs to be encouraged in order to keep greenhouse gases down. So I would just like to make the point that whatever we do consider, and I know you do consider this, that nature-based adaptation to keep the Bay alive is really important to a lot of people. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Gita. Chair Rabbit, I don't see any other members of the public who wish to speak on item 2. So that would conclude public comment on items not on the regular agenda.
Great. Thank you very much, Drew. Thanks for the help there. Thank you for those who provided comment as well. With that, we'll move on to the consent calendar. The consent calendar 3.1 has the minutes of our March 3rd meeting and our June 2nd meeting today. And I'll look to my colleagues if there's any questions, comments, or concerns over those minutes. If not, can I get a motion to approve?
Varian will move.
Thank you. In a second.
Pedrosa.
Drew, we got a second in there somewhere. And with that, I suppose we need to do a roll call on the consent.
I'm ready to do a roll call vote. And we'll start with Supervisor Arnold.
Aye.
Supervisor Connolly.
Aye.
Councilmember Fleming.
Yes.
Mayor Garcia.
Yes.
Supervisor Gorin.
I will be abstaining since I was not there.
Mayor Lucan.
Yes.
Mayor McConnell. Supervisor Pedrosa.
Yes.
Supervisor Ramos. Supervisor Spearing.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hannigan. And Chair Rabbit.
Aye.
See, that passes.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone, for that. Moving on to our main discussion items today. 4.1, talking about Sears Point to Mare Island Improvement Project, the interim project. And first, we're going to talk about the status, and we have Kevin Chen from MTC to give us an update. Kevin?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Chen with MTC. Let me queue up the presentation. It would be great if someone can help confirm that my screen is being shared with the slides.
Yep, confirmed.
Great, thank you. All right, so I'm here to provide an update on the Sears Point to Mare Island Improvement Project, often referred to as the interim project. So in terms of where we are with the project timeline, we are really focused on completing and finalizing the environmental document. At the last policy committee meeting, I provided a summary of the public comments we received from the draft environmental document. Since then, the project team has been working very diligently in addressing all the public comments and updating the environmental document. we actually working with Caltrans very closely on this, and we are getting very close to finalizing the environmental document. As you can see here in the red box here, we are really aiming for October to finalize the environmental review process. Completion of the environmental document is going to be a critical milestone because it allows us to be a lot more competitive for a number of state and federal grants that we are going to be competing for. So I just want to mention that, and as I've shared previously, after the environmental document, and hopefully we have some funding for us to proceed with the design work later this year. And the plan is that we would finish design by 2024, and then we can start construction in 2025, and then finish the project in 2026. So that's the current project timeline. Another area that we've been focusing on a lot in the recent month is really working in collaboration with a lot of the resource agencies in terms of opportunities that we can incorporate as part of the interim project that really can help provide environmental benefits and ecology enhancements. And I think what's important to point out is that it is very time sensitive for us to provide these improvements and not just having to wait for the long-term project. That's why we're having this discussion right now, and then the intent is to incorporate this project into the interim project so that we can start getting some environmental benefits as soon as possible. So one of these areas, as we've talked about before, is that the Tulare Creek Bridge, as it exists today, is a very narrow bridge, and we've heard from the environmental communities the importance of replacing the existing bridge with a much wider or longer bridge that can really provide the necessary channel width to help enable really a significant amount of planned restoration effort as part of the Sonoma Creek Baylands strategy. So the way you can think of it is replacement of the bridge is part of the equation, and then for the environmental community and the Baylands group to do the restoration, that's the other part of the equation, and we need to have both things basically materialize. I mean, you need to do both in order to materialize the environmental benefits. So therefore, I guess the ask for us is to really to look at incorporating the Tulare Creek Bridge replacement as part of the interim project. Another time-critical opportunity for us to look at incorporating is what's called the Strip Marsh East. This is the strip marsh that's south of Highway 37 in the Solano County area. There are hundreds of acres of strip marshes there, and what happens, over the course of the last many years is that due to dredging and other reasons, the marshes have been degraded, and then there's been loss of vegetation over time. And the call to action right now actually requires pretty significant interventions in a very timely manner to stop further degradation of the marshes, and to improve the tidal hydrology in this area. And having well-established marshes can also help provide resiliency benefits. Basically, it'll buy us a little bit more time for us to address the rising sea levels. So, these are some of the key opportunities that we are looking to continue to address and incorporate as part of the interim project. The chart that you're seeing right in front of you is kind of like a step, the kind of layout of the steps for us to get there. We don't really want to slow down the process that we are making on the interim project, so we'll proceed with finalizing the environmental document as we have been planning for. And the plan here is for us to continue to work very closely with the resource agencies in the next phase of this project, which is the design and permitting phase, in further looking at the design of the new bridge, of the Tulare Creek Bridge, and then we'll also be going through an environmental clearance process to replace that bridge as well. And the plan there is that we would, at some point down the road in the next year or two, we would catch up the bridge design work for the new bridge with the rest of the interim project, and then ultimately we can deliver the improvement as one construction package. Again, scheduled for 2025 and 2026. I think another area that we'd like to point out is that we've been coordinating very closely with the resource agencies, and then we plan to continue to have that discussion on these topics. We do have a meeting set up with the resource agencies coming up later in December, so I just want to point it out that the project team is making a lot of good efforts and progress in this arena. Let's see. This is my last slide. I just wanted to show our draft funding plan for this project. The total cost right now is we're looking at $430 million of total project cost. This does vary depending on the alternatives, but I'm looking at the higher cost for the purpose of funding. This cost does include implementation of bus transit service as well as public access improvements. So we've heard many times, and our earlier speakers have spoke to it, the importance of providing a bus transit on this corridor. So that's going to be implemented as part of the interim project. What I'd like to point out in this funding plan is that we have, right now we're in the process of trying to secure more funding for us to proceed with the design phase. Right now, there's only $3 million identified as part of the SD 170. So we actually need more funding for us to complete the PS&E phase. But what I'd like to point out is the funding opportunities to complete the rest of the funding plan. Tolling is still going to be a very critical piece for us to basically, with the tolling authority, it provides us the opportunity to finance against future toll funds. So I think Rebecca Long here from MTC is going to provide an update on the tolling discussion. What I also like to mention is back in May, we've submitted a grant to the US DOT for $100 million on this project. So this is part of the a multi-grant opportunity, and we've been focusing really on the Rural Service Transportation Program under this US DOT program. We received a lot of support from many of you, so I just wanted to say thank you for your support on the application. And then the next one up is, we are planning to submit for up to $150 million under the state SB1 funding program. This includes the Solution for Congested Corridor as well as the Trade Enhancement Program. So again, we're going to be working very closely with Caltrans on this application. Actually, the process has already started as we speak, and the applications are due, I think, in November. And we continue to look for your support as we compete for these various grants. Last but not least, I am happy to report out that we've been selected recently by the US DOT under their Regional Infrastructure Accelerator Program. This is definitely more applicable towards the ultimate project. It is a pretty tremendous opportunity for us with this because the US DOT is providing us with some funding to look into innovative financing as well as delivery mechanisms. Again, especially for the ultimate project, which is going to be a mega project requiring billions of dollars, looking at the potential eligibility under the US DOT Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, or the TIFIA program, is going to be very helpful. So I just want to report it out. It's not part of this funding plan. Again, it's part of the ultimate for us to really make some real progress towards the ultimate project delivery. So that kind of concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate that. And I do see a hand raised, and I'll go to our member, Jim Spearing. Jim, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kevin, the environmental agencies, are they receptive to the interim project or interim improvements for the environmental enhancement? Where are they on that aspect of it? Do they see the interim project as a first step to get to the ultimate project environmentally?
Yeah, so I've mentioned that we have actually been working very closely with a lot of the resource agencies, and actually the strip marsh opportunity, as well as the Tully Creek Bridge. I mean, those are actually ideas that we've received from the resource agencies or the regulatory agencies. So I think what's important to keep in mind is that, you know, these are opportunities that's very time sensitive. You know, the interim project, as we know, is a near-term project. It's something that we can really achieve in the next several years. And from a marsh restoration, you know, wetland restoration, habitat restoration standpoint, it's very important to tackle those also in a very timely manner. And, you know, the interim project is that opportunity to get there. So again, I can't speak for them, but I think, you know, I think there's general agreement that the interim project offers a great opportunity for us to incorporate these improvements so that we can do them together in a very timely manner and start realizing both transportation benefit as well as environmental benefits.
Yeah, you know, I thought that was the case until I saw the Huffman letter. And so that's why I asked that question. It was a little confusing. I thought they were on board on the interim approach that we're taking. So thank you for those comments, Kevin.
Yeah.
Thank you to Supervisor Gorin.
Good morning, everyone. And I apologize, I'm playing catch up a little bit. One of those meetings that I missed, I was at an all-day BCDC meeting, just full of fun and excitement. As you know, I also serve on the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority representing the North Bay. Thank you, Supervisor Spearing, for asking the questions. That was helpful for me in thinking through what the interim project would achieve. First of all, congratulations to everyone. It's been a long time that we've been meeting together to develop a strategy to relieve traffic congestion, but yet get us further along in habitat restoration, as well as a multimodal approach. And I'm a little nervous now that at this last minute, we seem to be fracturing a bit on the efficacy of the project. And so here are a couple of my questions. We know that habitat restoration is the adaptation to rising tides. We also know that BCDC sort of gave a pass on Highway 37 initially because they said we could never afford to upgrade the infrastructure to adapt to the rising tides. Well, we are. But the question, Mr. Chen or anyone else, the lengthening and widening of the Tully Creek Bridge, is that sufficient to get us to the point of starting the important work of the Bayland strategy and restoring the habitat to adapt to rising tides?
I can start. I'm not sure if anyone wants to chime in. I don't. So I think, you know, with both the Tully Creek Bridge lengthening as well as the strip marsh restoration opportunities over on the Solano side, I think those are very important and timely first steps towards improving both the wetland and habitat restoration. I don't believe that we can, you know, get to the ultimate goal, but again, it's something that we can do in steps, right? I think there is still going to be a need for the ultimate project for sure, for both addressing sea level rise as well as enabling some of the landscape large scale restoration projects that's being planned in the greater San Pablo Bay area. So I think, you know, it's important stepping stones in actually delivering and realizing those environmental benefits early.
And I think the key to the regulatory agency's response to the interim plan in particular resides exactly that, about the timeline of the interim project. The only thing that we do know that rising tides will happen faster than anybody can expect to see. And I hope that if in fact we get through to constructing the interim project, that we immediately start to work at the ultimate project, because in short time, the water will be lapping at the raised berms along this section, potentially. And I think that is true. So the question is, how long do we think the interim project will be sufficient? And what's our strategy for immediately going to work and designing and raising funds for the ultimate project?
Yeah, so I mean, I was saying, I'm not sure if anyone wants to chime in, but I think our plan and what we've been doing also is that we are not doing the interim project and then the ultimate project. Our approach and what we've been working on is really working on both projects in parallel. So the interim project is being worked on as we are speaking to it. The ultimate project, at the same time, significant progress is also being made as well. You know, I think later on you're going to get a presentation from Caltrans on the planning and environmental linkages study, which is really a first step in getting started with the ultimate project and looking at the different alignments. And there's been a lot of collaborations with the resource agencies on that effort. So I guess good progress is being made there. We've, as I said earlier, we've competed and we're going to receive a grant from the US DOT for us to look at innovative financing and delivery strategies for the ultimate project, which is another significant milestone that we are making towards the ultimate project. And I understand that a lot of efforts is also happening in the background for us to secure some funding to start the environmental review process for the ultimate project. So I just want to emphasize that we are working on both the interim and the ultimate project concurrently. And that's happening. So,
do we have a timeline potentially for the ultimate project? The completion of the interim project might be 2025 or 26. And what are we looking at for a timeline for the ultimate project?
I think the ultimate project timeline is something that's going to be further developed, but just kind of keep in mind that it is a multi-billion-dollar project, a mega project in a very environmental sensitive area. So I think it could take 15 years or a couple of decades. Yes, it's something that we hope that we can continue to have that discussion with all the resource agencies to look at ways to deliver that more efficiently. But just considering it's a mega project in the environmental sensitive area, we just have to be mindful about the impracticality, that it might take a little bit longer.
Chairman Rep, could I add just a little bit to that, if it'd be all right?
Please.
Thank you, members of the committee. Kevin's spot on with what he's mentioning. We recognize we've got more work to do with the resource agencies to, get them to understand the benefits of the interim and the opportunities to open up quite a bit of work for resiliency. And so we're working hard at that. I think that's what Kevin was talking about with our engagement. But there is definitely more work to do. We see a positive path forward, but we need to continue that dialogue. And as he mentioned, everything that we are doing is assisting us in moving the ultimate project, because that is a consistent goal. So I think it's important to recognize that Tole Creek and the work on the strip marsh are two of the most important improvements or opportunities for the resiliency improvements. And we're pushing hard on both of those fronts. We don't have the revenue, though, to really answer your questions directly about the technical impacts of the ultimate project, but we're working hard with the state of California, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to get started in parallel with the construction activities that are the interim series of projects.
Thank you. And I'll just end my comments by saying I know that the EIR is really looking at the environmental impacts from the thousands of cubic yards of fill to expand and construct the raised berms, and also the demolition potentially at some point when we get to the ultimate project, hopefully sooner rather than later. And as we think this through, are we thinking about strategies to use parts of the interim project eventually to combine with the ultimate project so that it's not pouring enormous resources in and then tearing it up and hauling it away? So I'll just end my comments, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations to all of us, and thank you, Suzanne, and all of the resource agencies pouring hearts and minds and time into this. And I know that the multi-benefit project is important to all of us.
Mr. Chair, can I respond to that last part about the use of interim and how we transition to ultimate? And I think there's really a lot to be done to figure out how that works. So saying, yes, absolutely, or saying no, never is probably, it would be unfair and inaccurate, I think. But I was just reminded of early days of the Marin Sonoma Narrows project. And there was a policy committee similar to this with Marin and Sonoma. And one of the sort of directives that that group gave was to keep the footprint. Director Arnold was on that, or Supervisor Arnold was on that committee, but keep the footprint of the project as small as possible. And that was like that was like a standing principle for the project. So the team understood, like, if we have to build a frontage road, we shouldn't build it, you know, as far off the roadway as possible. Anyway, I say all that because I think what we're hearing from the board members today is something similar, right? Like, how do we ensure that the interim project work is incorporated, or sort of the ultimate project can use some of that work? And I think that's a directive that we can take back over the next 10+ years as we're developing the details of the project as a principle that we should adhere to. So I just wanted to throw out that past example that we've used and suggest that's a way for us, for this committee to provide direction and for us to, as your staff, to move forward.
Thank you, Suzanne. So directed.
Thank you, Suzanne. Mayor Lucan.
Thank you, Chair. Kevin, thank you for your presentation. I appreciate the focus on the Tolle Creek Bridge there and that marsh strip. I'm curious on either of those price estimates are, I'm sure we're not even there yet, but that's not included in the 430 million. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So I mean, I partially, I guess I would say that. So what's included in our 430 is a cost to do environmental mitigation as part of the project. And, you know, we do believe that there's a lot of values in, in terms of replacing the Tolle Creek Bridge as well as the strip marshes as a way to help meet some of those requirements. So it's definitely partially built into the project cost. And as I said later, as I said earlier, we do actually need some funding as we move into the next phase of this project, so that we can really look at the potential design of the new bridge, for example, and figuring out that cost. So I guess until we do a little bit more work on it, I can't give a definitive answer, but we do have some of the costs built into the environmental mitigation, if that makes sense to you.
Gotcha. But if I'm hearing you correctly, if they were to say a significant lengthening of the bridge, then that would increase the cost. But until you know what the actual design is, it's hard to estimate. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Well, we do have a rough estimate initially that that could be potentially accommodated with the environmental mitigation cost that's already included. But like I said, until we do a little bit more work on it, we just cannot be definitive at this point. It's not expected to be a super costly item, so it's still going to be in the ballpark of the numbers that we presented, but it is something that we'll continue to look into in the coming.
All right, and any significant improvements that are being considered over the Tolle Creek, how do we make sure that they are aligning with whatever a future ultimate bridge or causeway over that span would be? Kind of going back to the previous question, I appreciate what Suzanne mentioned, using Marin Sonoma Narrows as an example of how that project came to be. But I think in that one, it was very much early phases of the ultimate project that we chipped away with. And I think a lot of the concerns that I have, and also that we're continuing to hear, is that the interim is not necessarily a phase one of the ultimate. And how does any work over the Tolle Creek tie into whatever the future ultimate project would be? Yeah, so the intent of the interim project is not to address the ultimate sea level rise adaptation needs in terms of building it at a much higher elevation. So, for the most part, the interim project is going to remain at the current elevation, right? In terms of, that was not the purpose of the interim project, to address rising sea level. So I'm not sure that the new Tolle Creek Bridge is going to be designed at the higher elevation that addresses, the ultimate sea level rise needs.
And I mean, I guess for that to happen, I guess that's going to be a much more substantial effort to build a pretty massive bridge higher up. And then we need to think about how it conforms with the existing highway. Again, to get to that higher elevation, it's going to be requiring a much more costly and potentially more environmental impacts to build that bridge. So again, I think we are, for the most part, we are still looking at the existing elevation for the most part.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. And Kevin, I just had a couple of questions, and I know that through our conversation that we recently had with Congressman Garamendi, talking about additional funding sources, it seems like all the funding sources that we've identified for the most part are truly transportation oriented. And of course, the mitigation, environmental mitigation would come out of that, as you said. But also, I think there's an opportunity because of the scale and scope of this project and the integration with the restoration and enhancement, that we could look for other non-typical transportation funding sources, like something out of the WRDA document, as was mentioned by the congressman, to see if we can't augment some of that work and really stretch those dollars further through the area. So I just throw that out there. And do we have the hydrology studies to know exactly how long the Tully Creek Bridge will be, or is that all part of what we're still in the midst of coming up with?
Yeah, we don't have the exact answer to that. We started having conversation with some of the resource agencies, so it's something that we'll continue to work on in the next several months, Supervisor. So, but I think so far we've been looking at potentially up to about 400 feet or so. Just to provide an order of magnitude, the existing bridge is only 60 feet.
Right.
And we're looking at potentially lengthening to up to about 400 feet or so. And part of the consideration is in terms of the constraint of the new bridge, is the ownership, the existing land ownership for Wings and Barrels on the north side, as well as the Vallejo sanitary districts on the south side. So that's part of the consideration as well. And Supervisor, I also wanted to appreciate your comment about the funding plan. Yes, you're spot on. We're also going to be looking at the possibility of competing for some of the state grants, hopefully for some of the resiliency grants. While we compete for the various state and federal funds, I mean, ideally we can get the amount that we request for, but in the case that we don't get the full amount, it's good to look at for example, the resiliency grant opportunities as another opportunity.
Yeah, I just think that there's we can't let those opportunities go by on that. And I guess maybe this is more of a comment than a question, just regarding I know that it's important that we don't, quote unquote, throw away any money with the interim project as opposed to the ultimate project. But even the lengthening of the Tully Creek Bridge, as you mentioned, to me, that's not really throwing away money if you want to lengthen it in order to enhance the up bay wetlands and then come back later and have to raise it. Because I think that you're gaining that benefit going forward, not unlike the benefit that one's gaining on the other side for the congestion relief, which really was, quite honestly, the primary reason the four counties got together in the first place. But I think that we all know that there's great benefit within this area to also incorporate the enhancement of the wetland restoration, but never forget the people that are waiting those 100 minutes per day of their life sitting in traffic unnecessarily. Supervisor Arnold.
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you. I wanted to thank you for the report, Kevin. It was great just to hear this whole plan laid out, and I think certainly we need to continue with this. The time that is spent in this area, in this B area, of trying to get over is really, we cannot continue that. And I think this plan is dealing with that. And I think that the faster we can do it, the better. I also think that, bringing the idea of a total thing is something that we can look at. And I think what you have said today shows that you're keeping that in mind as you do this. But I would really want to say that we should keep going on this and getting this done and getting what we need as far as dealing with the congestion that's there, as well as looking toward the environmental issues that we're going to have to deal with downtown. But we need to keep on this plan, and the faster we can do it, the better. And certainly, I think that Marin should be behind this. Everyone was behind us when we had the flooding. We were the other entities were behind it and said, let's get this done. We have to get it done. There was great camaraderie to do that. And I think we owe that now to this project, because I think it's just as important, if not more so. So thank you for the work that you're doing. And I just hope that you will continue, and thank you. Keep us informed, and let's get this part done. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Kevin, you have something?
Yes, Chair, but can I just add in a couple of things?
Please do.
Okay, so great. Thank you, Supervisor Arnold. Appreciate the support on this. I just wanted to basically just add a couple more points about the interim project and the comment about the potential throwaway costs. We don't actually see the interim project being a throwaway cost. I think we've talked many times about the economic benefit of this project that would provide to the daily travelers, not just the regular commuters, but more importantly for the truckers. Hundreds of hours and thousands of hours are being spent stuck in traffic for both commuters and goods movements. So there's a significant amount of economic benefits that the interim project would provide. And secondly, the ecological enhancement that we'll be bringing forth as part of the project is also something that it's not going to be lost, because you need time for to get to strip marsh and wetland restorations and habitat restoration. So there's going to be environmental benefits over time that's very valuable. And on top of it, I guess in terms of the actual construction of the interim project, can really help us much better understand the geology in this very challenging setting along this corridor. We have a lot of young bay muds, there's settlement going on. So it's really important knowledge for us to learn from the interim project as we proceed with the ultimate project from a construction standpoint. The additional lane that we would be providing, it's going to be very valuable for the construction of the ultimate project, because the additional lane will provide a lot more flexibility in traffic management for us to be able to construct the ultimate project more efficiently. So another point I want to point out is that funding, right? So we've talked about the importance of tolling. So the interim project enables us with tolling to implement tolling on this corridor, which can really help provide some of the funding that's needed for the ultimate project. Again, that's very important for the ultimate. Bus transit is lacking on this corridor, so the interim project delivers that. Transit ridership is going to need time to increase. The amount of people that would take buses, the ridership, as we call it, it's going to increase over time. So again, we need the interim project to start building ridership over time. And last but not least, the equity challenge is really significant on this corridor. So again, it's something that the interim project can deliver, is addressing the equity challenge on this corridor. So,
thank you, Kevin, for that. I'll look to my colleagues if there's any other questions before we move on. We will go through, I believe we'll go through 4.1 overall, the status, correspondence, and tolling options before we do go back to public comment, since we had we'll take it as a unit. So next up will be 4.1.2, which is talking about correspondence. And I believe that Rebecca Long is going to take this one from Andy. Rebecca?
Good morning, Chair Rabbit and other board members. Rebecca Long, Legislation and Public Affairs Director at DC. Yeah, so Andy had a conflict, so I'm subbing in on this item. And, we've had a great discussion already this morning, but just to kind of recap what is in your packet, there are 3 items that are under this sort of correspondence category. The first is a letter from MTC dated June 13th in response to the letter from Congressman Huffman of May 27th. And then also included is the Baylands Group position paper that was updated in July. So I thought I would just quickly recap, the key points in each, but I do think we've already had a pretty robust discussion. So I don't think any of these will really be new items putting on the table. So Congressman Huffman's letter, it included a lot of technical questions, which we do answer. There were specific numbers, and you can see our answers to his questions. But I think the key, items are his perspective that the interim project will harm wetlands and preclude plans to restore the baylands. Concern that the interim project would be an excuse to not build the ultimate project. Including a concern that, potentially the idea would be to simply add additional asphalt to try to escape rising seas. The letter does ask if we will ensure that any interim projects are designed in a manner that is causeway ready, and also asks for inclusion of SMART in the corridor planning. Does end on, what I view as a positive note, which is, reinforcing his strong support for the ultimate project, which, as you've heard, MTC and all of the transportation agencies here also support. So, it's great to have a champion for the ultimate project. In our response letter, we try to really restate MTC's commitment to an ultimate project that is multimodal, sea level rise resilient, multi-benefit, and that does provide habitat restoration. We disagree that the interim project precludes the causeway. And we highlight that the interim project not only provides some near-term benefit in terms of habitat restoration, which is what Kevin has been discussing a lot this morning, but also with the tolling, the strategy that with that new revenue, we can not only help fulfill the funding plan for the interim project, but have a down payment and a significant funding to attract those competitive state and federal dollars for that ultimate project. And then we do indicate our support and desire to include SMART in the process for the ultimate project. Turning to the Baylands position paper, which is signed by a number of different organizations, including Save the Bay, Sonoma Land Trust, and other nonprofits, as well as the State Coastal Conservancy and the Regional Water Quality Board. I think key point is the urgency of taking advantage of near-term funding opportunities, both at the state and federal level for the ultimate project. They do explicitly request that MTC, Caltrans, and local transportation agencies set aside the currently proposed large-scale interim projects. And I would note, in some of the letters, there's a reference to interim projects. We haven't been talking about the segment A portion, but I think, both are of concern to Congressman Huffman and the Baylands Group. And then at the same time, they advocate that any interim project be a logical, substantial step towards implementation of the preferred ultimate project. So I think there's some nuance there in the sense that the sort of opposition to the interim project is as currently proposed, which in their view is very large scale, and ask that, whatever the interim projects are, that they be that logical step towards the ultimate project. So I think that's probably enough of a recap, and I'll open it up for further discussion or any questions.
Thanks, Rebecca. I appreciate that. I'll look to my colleagues to see if there's any specific questions. I think appreciate that all the correspondence was in the package. It's pretty self-explanatory if you've read through it. I'm not seeing any hands raised, so Rebecca, maybe, oh, I do see one, Mayor Lucan.
So as we receive correspondence like this at this stage, and I think this is important correspondence. What is our response other than just sending letters back and forth? Can you maybe talk to a little bit, any efforts to bring stakeholders together to engage in dialogue as opposed to just exchanging letters?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Lucan. We have had a meeting with the congressman, and at that meeting, Congressman Thompson and Congressman Garamendi and many of you on the call today were present for that. Also in that sort of Zoom room were representatives of the Water Quality Control Board and other resource agencies, to really talk through these issues. So we're certainly, engaging in that dialogue. Also, our technical staff, right? Kevin and others have been having very regular dialogue, about the interim project, how to maximize the restoration benefits to help support the Bayland strategy. So, I think there's definitely a lot more going on in terms of communication than simply exchanging letters, and also conversations with, Congressman Garamendi last week, bringing him out on a tour and hearing his ideas for, improving the sort of hydrological opportunities. So, but we welcome, further suggestions on how to enhance the communication.
All right. I know there's a lot of conversations that are happening, through this group, outside this group, letters, all that. I guess for my colleagues on the call here, I do feel like we're at a very critical juncture, and we need to find a way to find resolution. And we need to, I don't think we could, and I don't think anybody's brushing any of this stuff off, but I do think this is a really critical time point, probably these next few months for this corridor. I don't have a magic solution, but I think we probably all kind of sense some of the same, and figuring out, where do we go from here and what is that next step?
Thank you, Supervisor Gorn.
Thanks, Eric. I absolutely agree with what you're saying, that even though we all want to see this project move forward expeditiously to relieve traffic and the congestion along there, I don't want to see us fracture at this point and maybe move to litigation. If there are opportunities for resolution, perhaps project a slight redesign to create more opportunities for habitat restoration, while building on that and moving towards the ultimate project. Let's take some time to have those conversations. And I'm not dismissing the letter and the correspondence and the conversations that have been had by and with Congressman Huffman. But if we need to do more to explore how we might move forward together, then let's move in that direction.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Not seeing any other hands raised. Rebecca, perhaps we can roll right into the tolling options.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair Rabbit. So I think everybody is aware that Senator Dodd's bill, SB 1050, did not move forward. It was held in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. That was a surprise to everybody, including Senator Dodd. So that was unfortunate. And we still don't have, a great understanding of why that happened. So there's that, and that happens. Been doing this for a while. Appropriations committees are where things often go to die. So, with that and with the significant tolling revenue that you saw in Kevin's presentation, that's part of the funding strategy for both the interim and the ultimate. We have pivoted to look at, what are other opportunities, and there had been, even before the introduction of Senator Dodd's bill, for some years, authority with the California Transportation Commission to consider applications for tolling on the state highway system. These have been primarily for express lanes, and in fact, the express lanes administered by a number of different Bay Area agencies, including MTC's Bay Area Infrastructure Financing Authority, is through that mechanism. The issue is that, or one constraint, I should say, is that CTC's authority only authorizes tolling on new capacity. And so, you know, the original design, and I think it's fair to say that the desired, you know, ultimate design, excuse me, I shouldn't use the word ultimate, but is to be tolling both lanes for the interim project. That's a, you know, congestion management strategy in terms of reducing the potential for increased vehicle miles traveled, as well as important for generating, you know, as much revenue as we can to help fund these projects. So, you know, for now, the strategy is to seek this authority for tolling from CTC. But we have been in conversations with CTC, who is interested in removing that restriction on their authority. So, you know, over the next year, perhaps that could be resolved, and we would really be back to enabling the tolling that we had been seeking through the Dodd bill. So that's where we are on that, and happy to answer any questions.
Great. Supervisor Gorin? Was that from before?
It was, sorry.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions regarding the regarding tolling? Not seeing any hands raised. Rebecca, thank you for that update. Thank you for the continued work on that. I know that you've put in some long hours, especially of late as the end of comes down to the wire. With that, I did say that we're going to take public comment for the 3 items we just spoke about on the Sears Point to Mare Island improvement project. And I do see a couple of hands raised. I'll ask Drew if he could help us through public comment and see if we've gotten any written correspondence as well.
Yeah, certainly, Chair Abbott. I did not receive any pre-submitted public comment on any of the 3 items here. And then I currently see 3 members of the public who wish to speak. We will start with Steve Bertelbaugh. Steve, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Steve Bertelbaugh with the Transportation Land Use Coalition. I think we need to recognize that until very recently, the location of the ultimate project was in question. And the Pell process has moved, I think, to the point that we know that the ultimate project is going to be at the same right-of-way as the existing project. That's a very important decision because it allows us to think about how we can segment the ultimate project in ways that save us money in the long run by not having to undo what we've already done. I think the second thing we need to realize is that it's the shift of people to transit that handles the congestion problem. Widening the road only attracts more people to drive, and ultimately, or very soon after you widen the road, you're right back to the original time that it takes for people to get from one place to another. So it's getting people into transit that's going to be the key to dealing with the question of congestion. And that leads us to the fact that we need to grade separate the smart right-of-way right next to the Tolay Creek Bridge. So if we're going to raise the road over the train so that we can operate trains without interfering with traffic, we need to consider whether we should raise the Tolay Creek Bridge to the ultimate level. And I would suggest that we look at that very carefully, because if you use queue jumps as a way of allowing the buses and carpools to get to the head of the line, people will realize very quickly that they're sitting in traffic if they're in a single occupancy vehicle, but if they carpool, if they ride transit, they're going to be able to get to their destination much faster. And the problem with widening the road is that you occupy many, many acres of wetlands, and that is a problem. So I would like us to really look at raising the Tolle Creek Bridge so that it does also provide grade separation for the smart right-of-way, and avoid having to replace one bridge with another bridge later on. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Steve. Excuse me, next I have in line is Susan Stomp. Susan, I permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you. I wanted to go back, and I appreciate Steve Bertelbaum's comment about doing things that will match the ultimate. We're looking at this project as two separate segments. The one of particular concern today is about the segment from 121 to Mare Island. This, the other thing that Steve mentioned is that we need to look at what the ultimate trail, the footprint for the ultimate project. And as Steve said, it's pretty much been resolved that it's going to be on the existing footprint. And there are two definite segments. The segment between 121 and Mare Island is a critical part of this and the reason for getting into this in the first place. We've now discovered that sea level rise and flooding is another problem. And that's in the segment from 101 to 121. And now that there is agreement pretty much, although they may not have had a formal agreement, that the existing right-of-way is going to be the ultimate right-of-way. And the reason they refused to look at doing the ultimate project on the segment on this, it used to be called segment A in Marin, Sonoma. If that is done instead of an interim project, which will be very, very expensive and unnecessary, why don't we go to the ultimate project in that segment now, instead of putting in millions of dollars of improvements and having to take them out, which will probably never happen at an ultimate time. And so I would urge you to look at separating those two segments and start authorizing work to be done on the 101, 121 segment now. The flooding is here now. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Next I have in line is Ariana Rickard. Ariana, I permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you, and thank you. I'm Ariana Rickard with Sonoma Land Trust, and thank you for the presentations and update. And I just want to echo Steve's point. We do want to see whatever happens with the interim project, allowing us to phase to the ultimate project. And we appreciate the inclusion of the Tolle Creek Bridge lengthening and the restoration of Strip Marsh East in the plans for the interim project. I just want to reiterate the point that Rebecca mentioned from the Baylands group letter, why we need our restoration work to be incorporated in any wall plans to address the transportation infrastructure in the area, and it needs to be done. And our timeline is 2030. And why 2030? Because the wetland restoration must start immediately to ensure habitat resilience to sea level rise, as tidal marshes that are established by 2030 are more likely to flourish and provide ongoing benefits when sea level rise accelerates in the middle of the century. And then specifically, we want to see those plans for the appropriate hydrological connections, facilitating restoration, including extension of the Tolle Creek Bridge, included in the redesign of State Route 37 and the restoration of Strip Marsh each. Again, that's that 700-acre strip marsh that is part of the natural infrastructure that protects the highway from inundation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariana. Next I have in line is Barbara Southman. Barbara, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Hi, I have a real basic question, and as someone who has participated in the Pell process for a long time here, I know a lot of other people have. I still don't know. There seems to be an assumption that what comes out of the Pell is going to be accepted as the ultimate project, but nobody is saying that. So I really have questions about how the Pell and the interim project folks from Caltrans are interacting, and what is the ultimate plan for all of the work and the conclusion that the Pell team has come up with. Is that going to be accepted? The Pell process was touted as being a way to facilitate and speed along the environmental review. So I hope that's going to happen, and maybe Tammy will address this, but I would appreciate at some point some explanation from Caltrans about how these two processes are ultimately going to be combined. Thanks.
Thank you, Barbara. Next I have in line is Thomas. Thomas, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, great. This is Thomas. And I wanted to say everyone's comments are very salient, particularly Supervisor Gorin, when she was talking about transit. And actually, I wanted to talk about transit. And it's when I said transit, I meant rail, but it also includes the bus and the queue jumping or flyways. Those are very important. But she did have very important questions. They were excellent to the presenters. And the coordinating, I think, is very important to avoid litigation. And so what Steve brought up is something that works for everything. In other words, if you were to lay out the issues, they're the smart rail crossing, they're the toll bridge widening, they're the elevation, and they're the bay movement, right? So the bay recharging of the wetlands. So that hits on all of them. In other words, by actually raising that, and it benefits from the standpoint that it answers Congressman Huffman's question about which things, how can he assure that what you're doing in the interim is actually integrated and fosters the ultimate solution. By raising toll, you actually accomplish all of that. In other words, to raise toll so that it's kind of like a Petaluma 101 bridge, that Petaluma bridge had to span it had to rise over the Petaluma River, and it also had to go over 116, and it had to do a bunch of things. So similarly, now hopefully it won't be as expensive, it's far shorter really, but it does those kinds of things. It has that need. It also satisfies those demands. Hopefully it won't have to be widened 3 times and things like that, but you could, when you're building it, if you look at it in the interim solution, you have the surface on which to put the eastbound and westbound traffic on the north and the south, so it can go around the project area, and then eventually when you're done, you put it back on top of this elevated roadway, right? But it gives you that opportunity to do that. If you go through an interim solution and then you're trying to widen on that alignment, you have a really different situation. You have a really, really difficult problem. Once you have the lengthened bridge, it's going to be very hard to actually get something over toll and get it aligned again. So I would so from a standpoint of timing of the overall project, it would really behoove you to do that sooner. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Next I have in line is Ed Schultze. Ed, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Great. Yeah, great. Good meeting. I learned something every time I listen in. This is great. Talking about the Tule Creek Bridge, poor old Kevin, he's first running a ladder. He's getting hit on heavy today. But anyway, I agree with some of the folks saying that if we're going to do it, why don't we do it so it's compatible to the ultimate project? I know it's going to be expensive. Chairman Rabbit addressed that, build it now, maybe improve it later on. But I think we should try and spend that money for the ultimate project by having it elevated over the rail things and long enough to come out and maybe compatible to the ultimate project later on. Granted, we need to have something done right now, but I'd like to see the money spent to have that Tule Creek Bridge compatible to the ultimate project. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Last I have in line is Geeta Dev. Geeta, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you once again. This has been a really useful discussion, and the questions that have been raised are really important. I simply want to reiterate a position several people have articulated, which is that it's really important that the Pell preferred alignment somehow be acknowledged, and so that we can move forward on that. And the second one is really to put the idea, I'm really appreciative of Kevin's detailed information and his budgeting and the sources of money. I think this is a time when there is, in fact, a fresh infusion of money for resilience and transportation improvements for resilience. So I really hope that we can make the Tule Creek improvement, the interim project, a segment of the final ultimate project. I think the time is right to get the funding. I know this is not easy, Kevin, but I would like to put the Sierra Club's support behind that particular notion. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Geeta. Chair Rabbit, I don't see any other members of the public who wish to speak. So I will turn this over back to you. Oh, you're still muted.
Thank you, Drew. Appreciate that. And thank you, everyone, for your comments. We'll move on then to 4.2, which is talking about smart integration within the Sears Point to Mare Island Improvement Project. And
Chair Rabbit, can we talk a little bit more and maybe have staff respond a little bit further on the Tule Creek and ultimate project integration point?
Okay, who from staff was there a comment made that wasn't addressed earlier?
Yeah, this is Kevin. Yeah, so I think we really appreciate all those comments on the Tule Creek Bridge, in terms of the replacement and how it could be faced into the ultimate project. So I think it's a question that we can, that we heard today. We want to spend some time to, with the partners and the project team to think more about it. Yeah, so we appreciate the thought.
Okay. With that, smart integration. And we have Suzanne Smith and Eddie Cummins, the general manager of Smart. Eddie, welcome for being here. And I'm not sure who's going to lead it off, but I'll make the assumption it's going to be Suzanne.
My mic was off, so thank you. The discussion earlier, and in particular, some comments about how we work together as partners throughout this whole region, has led to discussion at a staff level about formalizing the integration of SMART into the planning work in the 37 corridor. I want to lead with the fact that we have been working together over these past number of years, and a number of you serve on the SMART board, so there's a lot of overlap. But as I think you all know, we have a memorandum of understanding between and among the four counties, MTC and Caltrans. And so one of the suggestions we wanted to propose to, again, more formally integrate SMART into this effort is to amend that MOU and officially list SMART and include sort of what role SMART would play in the context of the scope of that MOU. So that was an idea we wanted to bring forward to the board today, or to the policy committee today. and get feedback on that. And then I just wanted to invite Eddie to make any comments he wanted to make, but that's really the crux of the discussion today is, should we pursue a formal amendment to the MOU, and what role does the board or the committee feel SMART should play in this?
Great, thank you very much. Eddie, go ahead.
I would just say thank you to Suzanne. I think she covered it really well. We've been talking a lot about this project, since my arrival at SMART, had a lot of conversations about this area. So really enjoyed working with people to this point, and I think it's a good idea to formalize and bring SMART into the MOU and just kind of formalize this process. So thank you.
And with that, I'll look to my colleagues. Any questions, comments, or concerns? I think I personally welcome SMART into the fold, and think that having formal understanding and recognition is going to be valuable going forward. So I do appreciate that. Supervisor Gorin.
Welcome, Eddie. I served on the SMART board for about a second and a half, just in time to welcome Eddie. And my question, and I think it's natural, there have been so many people on the policy committee and the community saying, why is not SMART integrated in our policy discussions? Absolutely, it should be. The rail line parallels Highway 37 for a distance. And I know that SMART is looking at building their freight hauling capacity along this corridor and through Sonoma Valley, potentially in Napa County. The question that I have is, and probably will be thoughtfully discussed a little bit later, is the alignment of a SMART expansion. Is it coming through Sonoma Valley, you know where my heart is, Napa Valley, and then to I-80 Capitol Corridor, or is it going to be proposed to parallel Section A, Segment A, and will it be on raised berms, or is it going to be on a causeway for the ultimate project? A lot of questions to talk about, but have we really thought through what this is going to look like? And I guess this question is either for Suzanne or Eddie.
I think I can start off. I think all these things need to be studied. As since I've been a part of these conversations, I've heard both, as you know, right? Using the existing rail line, and then also heard about the idea of just paralleling, Highway 37 in the ultimate project. So ultimately, I think you need to look at those. I think you need to do a kind of look at them, compare them. What is ridership going to look like? What's travel time going to look like? But you have to think through all of those things. And obviously cost is going to be one of those considerations. So I think you have to look at both. And Suzanne?
Yeah, no, I think there are many more questions than there are answers, not unlike the mainline corridor questions that we've just been talking about all morning, maybe even more so with SMART and the complexities that it brings. But look forward to working across all 4 counties and with SMART to figure that out.
And I would just say, I welcome the conversation. I think it's really important. I know that we're supportive of expanding SMART into Sonoma Valley. We've been paying for that for a long time, and love to see it there. I am concerned about moving SMART forward through Segment A, potentially on raised berms, which just exacerbates the conversation that we just had regarding the interim project versus ultimate project, the cost of that, and adding width to the fill and length to the fill of along that Segment A. I do have to leave. I have a Zoom at 11. So thank you all for indulging, and I'll check off now. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Garcia.
Yes, appreciate the conversation, particularly with respect to this SMART and rail line. Looking farther into the future, I can see a need to connect that with Capitol Corridor all the way to Sacramento, and likewise for a visitor and commercial workforce up through Napa Valley as well. Rail lines are already exist there. We took a look at that some time ago in American Canyon. It's a freight line, which is a much lower speed. We need some improvements in it going through Jameson Canyon. But that's a very futuristic plan. Appreciate the conversation on Tule Creek and the work being proposed there. That certainly makes sense. If design matches what would be part of the ultimate goal, would make perfect sense. As we all know, that's a particularly vulnerable part. They've been exposed to flooding. So work on that, I think, and could relieve congestion in that intersection as well. Good discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Supervisor Spearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Suzanne, I'm just, I don't want to put one more obstacle in the way or one more challenge that we have to solve to get the interim project keep moving. So, I just have a concern that if we introduce, SMART into this, are there going to be expectations that we do improvements that are going to, make this interim project almost out of reach? And so I do like having the discussion with the SMART. I think it's the right thing to do, but I just want to caution that, what that integration is into the planning that we're doing now. So just a concern that I wanted to raise.
Thank you, Supervisor. I appreciate that. And I think the alignment of interests is primarily related to the ultimate project. It seems to me. So both in segments A and B, the opportunities are, I think, greatest in looking at how those ultimate projects get built. So segment A might be a little bit ahead of the curve. And I think both from, I don't want to speak for Eddie, but I think they have an interest there. It's a little more clear cut because they are existing parallel routes. And there's a lot more work to be done in segment B to assess what the proper route should be, what it should look like. So I don't know that they have to be in lockstep, but more parallel efforts, just ensuring, I think, the communication is there.
Yeah, I mean, because I know Solano County is very supportive of SMART, and as Mayor Garcia mentioned, that connection Capital Corridor. I mean, those are the types of things we're looking for. I just don't want to burden our interim 37 project. That's the only concern I was raising. Thank you for that information.
I think that's a great point. Supervisor Arnold.
I'm sure I know the answer to this, but I'll just, Eddie, we did, SMART did an early study of taking the train to the, oh, excuse me, just a minute. Taking the train going over to the East Bay, and I know it was a cursory study, but you do have that, right?
That is correct. That was a feasibility study.
Okay, great. So that, all right, thank you.
Great, thank you. Anyone else have any questions on this one? Not seeing any other hands raised. I will go quickly and ask Drew to help us with public comment on this particular item.
Yeah, certainly. So I see one member of the public right now, Steve Bertelbaugh. Steve, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Yes, I think this is a marvelous step. It's important to look at all levels of transit. And I hope that we can influence the state rail plan, which is, I think, going to come out with a draft in a few weeks, to move the date forward for service on rail all the way to the Fairfield area. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Steve. Next I have in line is Thomas. Thomas, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. So this is Thomas, and I'm also, I didn't mention, with the Transportation Land Use Coalition. And I really think that Eddie's comment, Director Eddie, regarding SMART, that the cost is a consideration of where you're aligning. And of course, Supervisor Gorin's comment about having it placed on fill on the alignment of the existing 37. So those are problems. To placing the fill presents a lot of problems as far as what everything was just discussed about refreshing the wetlands and so on. If you put, on the other hand, if you put SMART on a causeway alignment, because the width of the train is so wide, but you need extra space for man walks and so on, you need all these different spaces. It makes it so wide that in fact you really essentially doubling the width of your roadway. So you're basically doubling the cost from 8 billion, it would be 16 billion if you were to make a causeway. So you're much more financially beneficial to put it on the alignment that you already have. Obviously, that alignment is going to cost less than $8 billion. So you make a great savings by doing that. You can also accommodate the differences in timing between improvements of the SMART, which could allow for the congestion relief that Steve was talking about, right? You can also accommodate congestion relief by a savings. We're talking about an $8 billion cost here, and the benefits of having congestion relief. You could have congestion relief on the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge with some type of transit connector between there. So there could be jitneys or other types. You could make a rail dedicated lane on the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge, because there is a lane that is dedicated to bicycles, and that could be placed on the outside of the bridge. So you could build a lane for bicycles, which doesn't have to have the load of the rail. I didn't mention that to you. I think you understand that the load of the SMART rail and freight, they have to be the same because they operate on the same line. So they have to be crash worthy. Being crash worthy means that they have to be really heavy. A line on the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge could be distinct from that and not have to be a heavy line. Also, the bicycles and so on, they're not heavy at all. So there's really no problem having an alignment on a Richmond-San Rafael Bridge that could relieve congestion for many years in the process, while you're accommodating the construction of SMART on its existing alignment. Again, you'd be making savings of $8 billion over the causeway alignment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. Next we have in line is a Rick Coates. Rick, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Rick Coates, representing EcoRing, which promotes eco-tourism and green travel. I'd like to say that we endorse very strongly the inclusion of smart planning within the Memorandum of Understanding. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Rick. Chair Rabbit, I don't see any other members of the public who wish to speak, so I'll say that concludes public comment on this item.
Great, thank you, Drew. Thanks for that help. And thank you everyone for your comments. Back to 4.3, Planning and Environmental Linkages Study. And we have Tammy Massengale from Caltrans with us. Tammy?
Good morning, everybody. Let me get my screen share going and we will start. Thank you for having me today with the update on the planning and environmental linkages. Oops, get this back. Sorry, I went to the wrong screen. Okay, great. All right, here we are. So I have a lot of information to share, but I'm also noticing that our time is expended. So I'm going to try and be quick. So if anybody has any questions for me from the committee, please let me know. This is an update since the last time that we met with all of you. You can see here we have done a lot of work. And I want to give a huge shout out to the folks that are part of our stakeholder working group and our 3 technical working groups for helping us get to this point. We have completed our level 3 screening and are preparing for a public meeting in a couple of weeks on the 14th in the evening at 5:30. And then we will be finalizing the health study report. And I just wanted to remind everybody, those of you that have been involved in the Pell know our purpose statement, but I just wanted to remind everybody where we started with the Pell, and that everything that we're going to talk about from this point forward is grounded in this purpose statement. And just a refresher on some of the terminology that we're using for Pell. Pell is a federal highway process, and we are incorporating CEQA into that. And some of our terminology is we will carry it forward as a core concept into PA&ED, project approval and environmental document, or into the environmental preliminary design phase. We can also carry it forward as a supplemental element, and that's something that doesn't really meet the core of the purpose and need, but it could be an improvement on that core concept. Eliminated means that it doesn't meet the purpose and need for the Pell study, and then not recommended means that we're not going to be moving further with the particular element in the process. You've seen this before. These are the different levels of evaluation that we have gone through. We started here in the first with the purpose and need, eliminated some alignments, which I'll go through with that. And then we looked at them a little more critically in level 2. And then in level 3, we completed that analysis. So just to bring everyone back, in level 1, we had evaluated alignments 1 through 9. They're shown here on the map. The team's recommendation was to eliminate eliminate alignments 2 through 3 and 8, to consolidate 5 and 6 because they were on the same alignment, and then also adding alignment 9 here, which would be a straight shot from Vallejo over to Novato. Based on feedback we received from the technical working groups, we were asked to carry alignment 8 through and look at it further because it was completely out of the bay. And so we listened to our technical working group and kept 8 in. I do want to remind everybody that this was purpose and need, and we felt like 8 didn't meet the purpose and need, but we wanted to do a full analysis of that particular alignment. So we moved into level 2. You can see here the alignments that we were looking at. As we were talking with our stakeholders, there was some concern that alignment 9, which went straight across here, would be cutting off the Sonoma Valley and the folks from Napa that come over to the west. And so we came up with an alignment 10, which would follow the same alignment as 9, but would keep this portion of the existing 37 corridor from Novato to 121. And it is similar to 7, but it doesn't have this extension, which would create an interchange over the water. So in level 2, we had a lot of discussion about vehicle miles traveled, which is the new traffic analysis that the department uses for CEQA, and not just the department, the entire state of California. And we came up with these 3 alternatives that did not have an impact in VMT. That was along the existing corridor with 5, 6, 8, and 9. And I know that that seems difficult with 8 to understand why. And I don't have time to go into all the technical analysis. I can just say, please trust me on this, but it has to do with the calculator that's used, and it's just the pure addition of lane miles. There would be some increase in VMT for alignment 7 and 10, but we felt like they could be mitigated for those impacts, which would be mitigated to 0, which would be less than significant. Then we had 2 alignments, 1 and 4, that had a substantial increase in VMT, which we probably couldn't mitigate. And then we were looking at 6-lane alternatives, and they were a no-go when it comes to VMT also, because it was too much. So coming out of level 2, we recommended not moving forward with with the level 6 options, alternatives 1 and 4, and alternative 7. And the reason that we chose to remove alignment 7 was because of this interchange that would have to be built, over the water here. It just really wasn't feasible. And alternative 10 provided that access to the Sonoma Valley. And then as part of our second level, we also made the decision that we would only be moving forward with a causeway for all of our alternatives except for 8, which would be partial small amounts of causeway, but most of it would be just regular roadway on the ground. So we moved, we eliminated 6, if you will, and we're just keeping alternative 5. And let me go back real quick. I wanted to address this primarily causeway. Some of the proposed ultimate will not be on causeway, and that's because it will be at grade. There wouldn't be any large earthen embankments or anything like that. All right, so moving into level 3, we went forward with alternatives 5, which is on the existing corridor, 8, which is up here on the far northern, and then 9 and 10, which were across the bay. We also looked at other modal options, including bike and pedestrian, rail, and then a shoulder running lane for express buses and or carpools. And the rail, we have been working closely with SMART and their staff on rail, and we are just moving forward that we don't want to do anything that precludes rail from their future build out that they're going to do. And the design options were the causeway and the embankments. So coming out of level 3, we had these alternatives that were going to have 2 general purpose lanes and that peak period shoulder lane. They would have bike and pedestrian and would be able to have rail run adjacent if that's the choice that SMART makes. And then I talked about that it would be preliminarily causeway and at grade up on alternative 8. So when we went through and did those analysis for level 3, we used the Plan Bay Area Model 2050. And we had several other the criteria that we used, but we don't have the time today. So I'm just going to highlight some of them that were sort of differentiating factors. The model that we used from the Plan Bay Area 2050 is new. It hadn't really been used for this. And there's not going to be any really changes to VMT than we did in level 2 because of the way that the 2050 model is has been developed. So what we really wanted to focus on here was the origin and destination pairs, because that's what we build our roads for, is for the traveling public. And as you all know, this is a very dispersed corridor. People come from all over to go places. And so we looked at the 4 top OD pairs, origin destination pairs, and we found that the best place would be to look at what the difference in mileage was and the travel time and what would happen in the peak flow periods. And what we found out was that alternative 8 had the most increased mileage for those 4 OD pairs. And then interestingly enough, if you were going from Vallejo over to Novato or over to San Rafael, the best route would be for people to go down and use the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge. So those folks that were going to Southern Marin would not be using the new highway. Alternative 5, which is on the existing corridor, and it had the best mileage, especially for the folks going over from Vallejo and to Petaluma. There's even less mileage just because of the geography up on the northern one. and it has the least potential to change regional travel patterns. Alternatives 9 and 10, the across the bay, had the least mileage for the Vallejo to San Rafael, Vallejo to Novato, and Fairfield to Novato. We also looked at equity priority communities because they're a very important segment of our population. You can see here that we have 3 distinct EPCs, one being and very large in Vallejo, about 68,000 people qualify as EPCs. And then you have the Boys Heights and Fetters Hot Springs in the Napa area up here in the north. And so looking at those, we felt as though the, we looked at it, let me correct that, I'm sorry. We looked at how the EPCs would be served by each of the alternatives. And what we found out is that alternative 8 does not serve any of those populations. Alternative 5 would serve all of them. Alternative 9 would serve 2 of them. And then alternative 10 would serve all but 1. And when I'm saying serve them, it's the existing way that those EPCs get from where they live to other points along the corridor. All of our other methodology that we used was based on acreage impacts. We're still looking at this at a fairly high level, and we wanted to make it so that it was equitable across all of the alternatives. And what we found is that alternative 8 had more at-grade intersections, and it is primarily located in uplands. Alternatives 5, 9, and 10 would be on causeways or bridges for the vast majority of their length. And then it's very important to note that these impacts that we've identified during the Pell will be evaluated further in NEPA and CEQA. So I just picked out a few of these that I thought would be interesting and informative, and that really helped us make our decision for the recommendation. And you can see here that farmland is divided into different areas. You have prime farmland, which means it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to mitigate. You have some unique farmlands, which would include the viticulture. And then you have the farmlands of statewide or local importance. And you can see here that 8 has significant impacts on all of those different types of farmlands. 5 has some impacts, 9 has the least, which would make sense because it's going across the bay, and then 10 has some. And then we looked at wetlands, and you can see and we looked at all types of wetlands, not just one particular type of a wetland. So alternative 8 had the least impact on wetlands. Alternative 5 was the next greatest, alternative 9, and then alternative 10. So we wanted to see, which one was going to have the worst or the best. And you can see by looking at all these resources that it is really a balancing act. We also looked at critical habitat, and that is where there are species that are listed, either live or they migrate to and from. So for alternative 8, there were 2 acres of impacts to the red-legged frog, the goldfields, green sturgeon, and steelhead critical habitat. Alternative 5 had 29 acres of impact to green sturgeon and steelhead critical habitat. And then alternatives 9 and 10 had substantial impacts, 696 and 710 acres to sturgeon, steelhead, and the Chinook salmon. So based on those 43 criteria that we looked at, our recommendations moving forward are that alternative 8 up here in the north will not be carried into NEPA and CEQA. And we've listed the reasons here. most of it is the impacts for regional travel patterns and the impacts to the equity priority communities. It's also very susceptible to wildfire closures, and there's a huge impact to the prime farmland and terrestrial species. There would be noise abatement required because there are a lot of residences that would be very close to the highway, and it would have the most adverse effect of visual quality. We did look at the purpose and need also, and it is still recommended not to move forward with alternative 8. Alternative 5, the recommendation was to move it forward as a core element. There were a variety of reasons to do that, but it really minimizes land conversion, it maintains the existing travel patterns, and the resources that will be impacted. So I listed some of those, the wetlands, the fish species. Those areas have already been impacted by the development that has taken place along the corridor. So they wouldn't be as significant as impacts as some of the other ones. This would also allow for the landward marsh migration, which we've heard from our stakeholders is very important. It would not induce VMT, and there would be minimal ag land impacts. And also, and probably most importantly, is it really is a balancing act here between the impacts to both upland species and resources and aquatic species and resources. And it met our purpose and need. And then alternative 9, we are recommending it not be carried forward because of the huge impacts to the aquatic resources and critical habitat. And this area here is land that has not been impacted by development, so they would be very significant impacts. It would cause new traffic noise to the community of Belmarin Keys over here. There would be a big visual change for the San Pablo Bay. Instead of people looking out and looking at the water, there would be a very large structure there. We have heard from our resource agencies that it would be very challenging to permit this project. BCDC was very clear with us on that. And then it would eliminate any connection to Sears Point. And we've went through and talked about how it compares to the purpose and need here. And then alternative 10, we're recommending that that is not carried forward. And the reason for that, whoops, I'm sorry, I had these backwards, is that it would have the most impacts to aquatic resources and critical habitat. It would require fill within the bay, which will not meet BCDC's requirements. And then it would cause additional travel for folks that would be going to Sears Point, which we know is a large recreation area. There would be the increased traffic noise at Belmarin Keys and that visual change that I talked about. And then we looked at it compared to the purpose and need also, and you have that in your slides. So with all of that being said, what the Pell study is recommending is that when the project moves into PNED, that the ultimate project will be along the existing alignment. And when we looked at this, we are recommending that it's an expressway design with 2 travel lanes in each direction with a peak period shoulder running lane. The posted speed limit would be 65, and that would be our design limit would be 70, excuse me. There would be accommodations for bikes and peds along the corridor. We're still, we're listening to the stakeholders still to see if it would be right on the facility or if there would be a cantilever, so that it would be more of an enjoyable experience. There would be access through interchanges and also there would be some access points that would be challenging for us. So we're still working through that. And this would provide the opportunity for SMART, if they so chose, to be adjacent to us. Okay, and for sure here on the western portion, they would be able to still remain adjacent to the corridor. This is the profile that I was talking about that we are working with. You can see that we have our 2 traveled lanes, the peak period shoulder running lane, and then on one side we would have the pedestrian and bicycle access. So what are we going to do next? And Barbara asked this question, so I'm glad that she did. Thank you for that. There's some work that still needs to be done, right? We're not ready to do an environmental document on this, but all of this work that has been done by the team will move in and will help expedite the environmental process. There's work that still needs to be done for us in the Pell, and those areas that we're going to continue to look at is how are we going to place the causeway? Is it going to be north of the existing alignment? Is it going to be south? Is it going to be a mixture? Where are those locations for interchanges going to be, and how are we going to design them? What access points do we have to keep? And then I talked about the bicycle and pedestrian lanes. And then of course, tolling and funding is the $1 billion question, right? Because this is a very expensive proposition. And then we will continue to work with SMART on how they envision aligning with the corridor. So our next steps are we will finish up with a stakeholder working group meeting on, oh, I forgot to change this, sorry, it's September 14th. Our technical working group meeting is next week. We're going to be diving into some of those details that I just mentioned that we still need to work on. And the public meeting will be September 14th. Oh, it's down here. I forgot my stakeholder working group. Sorry, I'm trying to hurry and I'm losing my train of thought. So I apologize for that. And then we will have our last stakeholder working group on September 30th. And then the Pell study will be produced. And part of the Pell study that I think is going to be of particular interest to you all is going to be our implementation plan and how we see future projects coming out of this Pell and building that ultimate project. So I know I went super fast through that, but I'm able to answer any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you very much, Dan. We appreciate that. I'll look to my colleagues. I do see a hand up. Mayor Lucan.
Thank you very much. Exciting to see all the progress on this. Probably just more of a future timing question. When do you start doing that additional, level of detail on some of the design, the interchanges, and I assume at some point it would be whether or not the ultimate could be phased and what those phases would look like. Are there natural segments or chunks that would be done first, or talk me through that a little bit kind of over the next year or so.
Yeah, you're spot on that. Some of the things that we're going to be doing is when we meet with the technical working group and the stakeholder working group, we're going to start talking with them about where we want some of those interchanges, whether the road should go north or south. And so we'll have that refined a little bit more, and we'll include that in the Pell study report. Then it all depends on money. It really does, to be 100% honest with you. As soon as the project approval and environmental document phases can be programmed, depending on what we line out in the implementation plan, then that's when we'll start. And I don't have an answer. I can't tell you we're starting in March of 2023 because funding is the critical issue.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions? Not seeing any hands raised. We'll go quickly to public comment. And Drew, I see one hand over there.
Yeah. Now I see a couple more hands going up. We will start with Steve Bertelbaugh. Steve, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. This is a very good presentation. It's been a long road, The one area that I have concern about is the statement that there is no increase in VMT. But since the statewide goal is to reduce VMT by about 22%, I think that will be the major issue that we need to deal with here is how do we have an element project that does reduce VMT by 22%. And pricing probably will be the main issue there of the tolls and how we manage that. So that I generally I have great admiration for the work that's been done on this. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Steve. Next I have in line is Barbara Saltzman. Barbara, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Yeah, I too wanted to commend the process and Tammy for running a good, efficient process. And I'm still not too clear on the answer to my question. I would like someone to say whether more clearly how the Pell is going to be integrated. I hope that you take all the recommendations from the Pell. So that's my bias. Thanks, and thanks, Tammy.
All right, thank you, Barbara. Next I have in line is Geeta Dev. Geeta, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you. And thank you, Tammy, for a really interesting presentation. I want to make it clear that on this comment, I'm not speaking on behalf of Sierra Club. I'm speaking on behalf of myself as an individual. In looking at, Tammy, at your section, which was very interesting, I want to raise something for you to think about, for Caltrans to think about. And that is that the bridge itself can be supportive of habitat. And a good example is the bridge in Austin, Texas. I believe it's called the Richards Congress Bridge. It is famous right now amongst everyone, tourists who congregate by the thousands on the bridge every day to see the bats take off. And that is a very subtle design issue. I noticed that you showed a box structure on the bridge. I'm sure that's extremely conceptual at this stage, but prefabricated concrete structures, which I'm sure we will end up using, could be designed so that the gaps between the beams are just right for bats or for swallows. So I just want you right now to be thinking about that and keeping that in mind as a real opportunity rather than this horrible structure that we have to have anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. Next I have in line is Thomas. Thomas, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great, thank you. This is very interesting, and I wanted to say thank you for the in-depth presentation that expressed the complexity of this type of work and the decision-making going into it. I think one area that I thought about was if you were to go on an alignment parallel to the existing rail line, that you would find yourself going through Jamison Canyon and as I understand, Highway 12 there. And there is a political consideration. So your option 8 would have run into a political consideration of the Chardonnay Club. And believe me, that was, to my mind, my thinking was a tremendous political consideration. That would have been a whirlwind. So in addition to all the concerns that you have, there are also political concerns, particularly in Napa. That's not, Chardonnay Club is not very valuable farmland, but it's extremely valuable to those members of the Chardonnay Club. And additionally, so this is great, establishing this route. I believe this is number 5. It's really terrific. I think looking at that section, as you can see, if you were to add the rail in there, you're going to be adding at least a 30-foot width or more to that, and you know, that would be just proportionally just extreme in terms of loading and cost. I notice that you're putting bike lanes on there, and I think we would benefit by having the bike lanes along the existing rail line, and from a wetland standpoint, and from eyes on the trail and the habitat, that type of thing. That would be great. You could have them there, but in fact, I think as I was looking at that, you're going to need an evacuation route, because there periodically are, say there's fog. There's fog out there. Maybe we won't have fog in the future, but currently we have fog, and you can have a tremendous accident on this alignment. Fire, conflagration, everything, and you're going to have people get evacuated off that. So you're going to have some kind of lanes, bicycle lanes, walking lanes, things, no matter what, unfortunately. They might be at different elevations. I want to save my last comments to respect the previous commenter, and to think it's possible that if you have those lanes for bicycles and pedestrians, that you could also have, say, like rooftop gardens, like trees could be placed along the center line of this and be shade for the roadway and the people. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Thomas. Next I have in line is Rick Coates. Rick, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you. I noticed that in the picture design that the bicycle and pedestrian pathway was at the same level as the traffic, subjecting them to both traffic noise and pollution. It would seem reasonable to me to, at the very least, to drop that pathway down a little bit so that they're not subjected to the pollution and the noise. If you really want them to be used, you've got to make them a lot more attractive to people. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Next I have in line is Rick Franks. Rick, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just wanted to add quickly, a prior speaker discussed the bat situation in Texas. We don't have to go to Texas to see this. You can go to the Yellow Causeway, the elevated causeway, just west of Sacramento. And there's thousands of bats that call that underneath that causeway home. And what they've been able to do is eliminate pesticide use by the rice farmers in that whole area, because the bats take care of the insect problem. So the sooner you can get that raised causeway built, the better it's going to be. And it's unfortunate this committee's been reduced to 4 folks, but this has been a great report. And Tammy's done a great job. I've been part of that situation. I want to thank you, and I hope that the other members will read her report with great detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Chair Rabbit, I don't see any other members of the public with their hands up, so I would say that concludes public comment on this item.
Okay, great. Thank you again, Drew, for your help. Thank you to the public for their comments. Bringing us to item number 5, which is committee member comments or staff updates. And I'll look to my colleagues for any good of the order, or I do see a hand raised by Supervisor Spearing.
David, will we get a copy of these slides that were just shown by Tammy?
Tammy, is that possible?
You're on mute, Tammy.
I'm sorry, thank you. Yeah, they should be in the packet. So
okay.
I'm also happy to send to the
great presentation, Tammy. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry I went through it so fast.
No, thank you. And great. Again, anyone have anything? And I'll look to our executive directors if there's anything that is vital to get out. I'm not seeing any hands raised. I'm not hearing any voices. It should be noted that on our future topic, we're next going to talk about bus transit through Solano County Transportation Authority, I believe. And with that, I think that brings us to the end of our business for today. And I want to thank all the staff members that have been working so diligently. Thank the public for participating today, and mostly, again, thanking my colleagues for their participation and guidance on this pretty vital, important corridor in the North Bay for not just our 4 counties, but really the entire region and Northern California. So with that, we are adjourned. And again, thank you all.